It's the Dynasty After Party here at Club Fantasy. I'm Josh Hudson. I'm filling in for Michael Sicoli, who's on assignment with his other job. But we do have Joel Wirth, and quite honestly, he's the star of the show because I'm just going to drive him a bunch of questions. So we are, after last week, previewing the Combine. We're reacting to it. Over the last few days, we've seen a lot of new future NFL talent coming in and putting on a show in their underwear here at the NFL Combine. So let's get into all the fun and dive into these prospects. What's up, Joel? Can you hear me?
Yeah. Sorry. I had the YouTube stream on. I didn't have it muted.
This is Club Fantasy, the Dynasty After Party. I'm your fill-in host for today, Joshua Hudson. That is the man, the myth, the legend, the Joel Wirth. How we doing this morning, bud?
Doing good. It's first week of March, and it's like almost shorts weather here in Northeast Ohio. It's going to be like in the 70s tomorrow, so looking forward to that. Like next week is both daylight savings time and exactly 6 months until the first Sunday of the NFL season 2024. So it's crazy.
Nice.
Time flies,
yeah,
man.
Nice to get into some shorts weather. It's been unrealistically cold here in Florida for a much longer period of time than it typically is. And which is great because I've been selling a lot of hoodies at work and I love that. So but yeah, definitely getting back into the swing of things. We're starting to see like the spring break season come to fruition. And so I'm very happy about that. So real quick, guys and ladies, if you are not subscribed, hit subscribe on the Club Fantasy FFL YouTube channel. All those likes and subs go a long way towards putting smiles on our mostly unattractive faces and helping us inch towards that 1,000 subscriber goal. So we greatly appreciate all of that. You can find Joel on the app formerly known as Twitter at the Joel Wirth, myself at the one Hudsonian, and of course Michael Sicoli, who is not here today. And you'll see that I am not as good as Sicoli, but I'm going to do my damnedest to make sure that this show does not go off the rails. But you can follow Michael at Michael__Sicoli. All right. As mentioned in the top of the show, we are going to be reacting to the NFL Scouting Combine. All the guys running 40s in their underwear and catching balls and drills and passes and, you know, jumping far and long and all that good stuff. But of course, we always got to start with your NFL news and notes. Biggest one I think that's really come out of this week, Bucks, well, I guess former Bucks wide receiver, since he is officially a free agent, Mike Evans, quote, wants to play with an elite quarterback in an offense that will showcase him. So let's start here. Is that elite quarterback on the Bucks, and could he re-sign with the Bucks?
Yeah, that was a quote from his agent, right? Like a direct quote. So it's kind of, I mean, who becomes the team that has an elite quarterback, has an offense that will showcase him, and has the cap space that can afford him? I mean, the first team that
the last part of that is the most interesting one, right?
Right.
Who has the cap space? Because your elite quarterbacks are paid elite money and don't have the money for big time wide.
You know, we're hearing he wants like $25 million a year, which is probably justified given his production and his historic, you know, how good he is. So like the first most obvious teams like Houston, but we're hearing that they are not going to target him, that he's not, you know, someone they're going to go after. They want to re-sign Nico Collins. They've already got Tank Dell. Obviously our friend Ryan Weiss wants him to go to Kansas City. Is that practical if they're going to sign Chris Jones, if they're going to re-sign Chris Jones, which a much bigger priority, it would seem. You know, maybe if they end up trading L'Jarius Sneed, who they tagged, it's possible you could probably fit him in, but is that something they want to do? I don't know. Jacksonville, maybe, if assuming Calvin Ridley leaves.
The reports that I literally just read on ESPN from Dane Graziano and I believe Jeremy Fowler, some of the news that they're coming out of the combine, is that Jacksonville is itching towards re-signing Calvin Ridley. Now, whether
Really?
that happens or not is a different story. When we did our wide receiver preview show on No Punt Intended this past Wednesday, I was of the mindset that Jacksonville was going to let Calvin Ridley go simply because by re-signing him, they owe the Falcons a second-round pick.
Yeah.
And personally, in this very, very deep wide receiver class, I would much rather take a pretty talented wide receiver in the second round, reset that contract clock versus paying Calvin Ridley $20+ million a year. Who's
Especially
already 30, by the way.
Right. Especially when you're picking in the middle of the first round. I mean, you're going to get a pretty juicy target at whatever their second round pick would be, around 50, something like 45, 50, something like that. So yeah, that would be very surprising to me. Like, you never know, but and he just didn't seem to gel with Trevor Lawrence at all. So that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So I'm still kind of leaning that Mike Evans ends up going back to Tampa, but we'll see. It's definitely an interesting quote, especially coming directly from an agent.
Yeah, my pick for Evans was the Panthers because of the connection with Dave Canales. Obviously, they have a huge need at wide receiver. They can create some cap space with some restructures, tagging, hopefully extending Brian Burns. But you can't grow Bryce Young and turn him into a potential franchise quarterback without giving him some kind of legitimate weapon. I understand it's not the most ideal thing to pair a young guy with a 30-something-year-old wide receiver because he probably only has three being a stretch, good years left. But the veteran, the savviness, that goes a long way towards helping build the confidence of a young quarterback. And, of course, coming in and knowing the offense that Dave Canales wants to install there, I think, to me, that's going to be the biggest marriage of, opportunity and money. So I think from this quote, you kind of need to take the two best options and then just settle on the third.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that's kind of the best place for him. And like Sicoli and I have been saying, why weren't the Panthers in on DeAndre Hopkins last year just to get him that veteran? DeAndre Hopkins isn't a world beater at this point of his career, but he's a veteran. He's smart. He'll be in the right place.
Last year.
Yeah, exactly. He gives you an option. So yeah, they need something like that. Even if they take a receiver with that first pick of the second round, that's still a rookie, right? How much can you trust that guy to come in and lead a wide receiver group that's as bad as there is in the league, right? I mean, that's easily the worst.
Yeah, I know it's only been 1 year, but I think it might be safe to say that Jonathan Mingo just ain't that guy.
Wasn't even the best receiver on his team in college. So.
Ooh. All right, let's switch gears since we're talking about young players here. Scouting combine reactions, review, whatever you would like to call it. There's definitely been some buzz going around this week, looking at a few things, really. Let's start with the big dogs, right? The big group that everybody fully expects to all basically be picked here in the top 10. You've got the quarterbacks, Caleb Williams, Drake Maye, Jaden Daniels, the big wide receivers, Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, obviously the stud tight end, Brock Bowers. None of them decided to take part in the on-field drills. Now, some of them, I believe Jaden Daniels was the only one that didn't actually get measured. But, Joel, let's first talk about this. Is this a red flag for you if you are an NFL executive?
No, in no way whatsoever. And I put on Twitter, the only thing that sucks about this is, like, we lose these guys as comps for in the future, right? So whenever we want to make a reckless comp to Marvin Harrison or Malik Neighbors or Caleb Williams, we're just going to lose these guys. They'll do their testing at the pro day, but it's not the same, right? You just don't have the officialness of the measurements. So yeah, these guys are all going to have their pro days. They're all going to measure. They're all going to test. They're all going to do what they need to do. But no, I have zero concern that this is going to affect their draft status in any way whatsoever.
Did you find it interesting that the moment that Marvin Harrison Jr. decided he wasn't going to do the testing, did you find it interesting that Malik Neighbors also decided not to? Because for some people, obviously you have the Marvin Harrison Jr. club, you have the Malik Neighbors club. by neighbors kind of testing, do you think that maybe could have swayed more people in his direction, and maybe this was a missed opportunity for him?
I don't think so. Like I said, they're going to have their pro days, so they're going to have their opportunities to test. And there's an argument that they shouldn't be testing right now, right? I mean, you look at, and we'll talk about Keon Coleman later, who ran a really bad 40, but I think that was more a function of him being really bad at running the 40 and not a indication of his actual football speed. So, yeah, I mean, there's an indication, or there's a reason to think that these guys may be better off just skipping the combine and just doing their pro days and going. These guys are so talented. They're so elite. Like, these are just elite prospects going back several years that there's no reason for them to test. That nothing is going to change. From their testing is going to change their draft stock.
Yeah, and I remember you saying on last week's show that, the combine, if you were in on somebody, it really shouldn't change too much of your opinion, if I remember that correctly.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, you're going to have some performances. You're going to have some performances that, maybe I need to go back and look at this player a little bit more in depth, right? And I think there were definitely some players that, really kind of popped off on the combine that you're kind of looking like, oh, shit, I wasn't familiar with your game. Let's go check this out real quick, But speaking of an elite performance, let's just get it out of the way. Xavier Worthy, God, right? Because a 4.2 140, if Al Davis was alive, that man would be turning in his card right now to draft this man.
Yeah, that was pretty insane. Like, AD Mitchell, AD Mitchell and Brian Thomas Jr. were having just crazy good combine performances, and Xavier Worthy just went spotlight right here.
Hold this beer.
Took it all over. Yeah. And his testing, it wasn't just the 40. His entire testing was elite. Like 40-inch high jump and broad jump was crazy high. So, yeah, I mean, this wasn't just like a John Ross, I can run really fast. This was, I mean, he's obviously very small. I think he weighed in at 165. He was 5'10", something like that, 5'10"-ish and 165. So he's not big. And he's going to have to run fast, but he ran really, really fast. Like, the entire testing regimen was really, really good with him. So really impressive stuff. And there's a lot of prospect analysts who have been on him for a long time. And this kind of verified that law. He's had some drops issues at Texas, but like that, he's got the tools.
Don't matter when the volume is there. So
yeah. Drops
as long as he gets peppered with 130, 140 targets a season, nobody's going to give a shit about his drops.
Yeah. Now, can that translate at his size? We'll see. But I think he definitely almost certainly put himself into the first round.
I'm glad you brought that up because it's something I'm going to bring up a little bit later. But let's shift gears a little bit. Let's talk about this quarterback class. So obviously, previously mentioned the big dogs here, right? Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, Drake Maye, they didn't throw. So then it comes down to, all right, this is the opportunity. JJ McCarthy is going to come in. He's going to light the world on fire. Watching what he did on the field, and there's now being buzz about him potentially jumping into that QB3 range in the draft, but he was pretty well cemented that he was going to be either the top of that next tier or the guy that could make that jump. But I think QB4 is probably where a lot of people are at on JJ McCarthy. Do you think that his performance on the field at Lucas Oil Stadium helped or hurt him or kind of leveled the playing field? Just kept things kosher?
I think it helped him. I mean, the weigh-in, he came in at like 219, and I think he played at like 205 or something like that. So I think that extra weight and showing that he could handle that weight and probably play it that way was a good thing for him. And he threw pretty well. It wasn't great. I mean, he didn't kind of blow anyone out of the gym, but he threw well. He threw some deep balls in his workout and that was one of the questions about him, right? Is did he have the kind of elite NFL arm strength? And I think he showed that he does. So, yeah, I think it definitely helped him.
Yeah, I didn't think it was bad by any means. I just felt like from what I was able to watch from him, it looked a little uneven in some instances, right? Like the first round was kind of like, oh crap, I don't have a good rapport with these receivers. I don't know which way they're going to go and this and that. And he was like, all right, we got the second one. We got this. And then the fluidity looked a lot better, right? So it's like, okay, cool. Now I can see that when he makes a mistake, he takes a breath, he regroups, all comes back into motion, right? It's like, all right, cool. You can make adjustments on the fly. That's what is going to make a good quarterback prospect, right? I don't know that I love this talk about him potentially moving up into the QB3 range. That means he's a top 5 pick in the NFL draft, and I'm not there yet. I'm not, sorry. But so, you know what? It's March. We need something to talk about. So
yeah, yesterday I was watching some of it. I had it on while I was kind of working around the house, and Daniel Jeremiah was insinuating that there could be 5 quarterbacks taken in the top 15-ish.
I don't really think that's unsurprising given the level of quarterback play in the NFL. It's like, if you don't have a great one, you don't have a good one, plain and simple, right? So everybody is going to throw any and all resources at the quarterback position. So I don't think that opinion is bad by any means. I also think that all those GMs that are making those picks are probably not going to have a job in 3 years as a result. But that's just the way that the NFL goes, right? You make a mistake, you get cycled out and then recycled back in, because that's what it is. But when teams are desperate for quarterbacks, and they are desperate for quarterbacks, there's really only, I'd say, 3 starters, like quality-ish starters, that are available heading into this free agency cycle: Kirk Cousins, Baker Mayfield. And if you want to throw Justin Fields in that mix, I think that's a valid argument. Outside of that, you're looking at the draft, or you're looking at backup retreads that are nothing more than placeholders, that are probably going to get benched in 6-7 weeks before the team says, you know what, I need to see what this 5th round rookie pick can do, right? Or 3rd round or whatever. So I don't think that's unheard of, but I also think that a lot of the opinions that are coming out on JJ McCarthy is that the noise is, oh, he's not that good. He didn't put this on tape because he wasn't asked to do this, yada, yada, yada. Whereas some of the scouts they're playing the NBA game, right? Where it's like, you're drafting on potential. You're taking him because, oh, I see that this trait could potentially lead to this, and I have faith in my coaching staff that they're going to get them from point A to point B. That's what gets coaches fired, GMs fired. Let's be real here, right? We've seen it all the time. We've seen it. But we've also seen cases like Josh Allen, where his mechanics were god awful, but you see the potential, and good coaching helped get him there. Do you think that McCarthy can be somebody that can get from point A to point B with that potential?
Do I think he's a Super Bowl caliber quarterback? No, I don't. But I think he could be is he a starter? Is he like a Daniel Jones level starter? Daniel Jones went like 6 overall in the draft, something like that. Obviously overdrafted, but yeah, could he be that level? Sure. Yeah, he could be a guy who can start for 8-10 years and get you to the playoffs every other year. Sure, he can be that if that's what you're looking for.
Hey, I don't think it's cool.
Exactly. I don't think he has the elite upside of kind of the other guys in the draft. So, and you bring up a good point, right? Is if you're going to, like, say someone wants to trade up with Arizona to get to like the 4 spot to take him, if it becomes that kind of arms race, you're going to make a trade where you're going to get huge amounts of assets and forego taking someone like Harrison or Neighbors, or there's elite prospects in this draft at non-skill position, like
especially at offensive line. Holy crap!
Offensive tackle
on Sunday.
Oh
boy, there's some big boys in this draft class.
Yeah, exactly. There's 3 elite defensive ends. There's some really good cornerbacks in this draft. There are really elite prospects at prized positions in this draft. And are you going to risk trading up to get a mediocre quarterback? That's risky.
Yeah, definitely. All right, real quick, because you put it in the show sheet, so I want to bring this up. Drake Maye, height measurement 6'4", 3 3/8 of an inch, 223 pounds, 9 1/8 inch hand size. Good measures, concerning measures, thoughts?
I put that in there as a question last week just because he always seems smaller on film than he was listed. The height was there. He was about 12 pounds lower than he was listed. I think he was listed like 235, something like that. So a little bit smaller, but nothing that would concern you. The hands is interesting, right? That's not big for someone that size.
But it's not Kenny Pickett, so we're okay.
No, it's not Kenny Pickett, of course, but it's interesting. I'll just leave it at that. You would think someone 6'4", 225 would have bigger hands. And like we'll get to Michael Penix, who was top 10 all time for hand size at 10.5, who's significantly smaller than Drake Maye measured. So interesting.
Okay. All right. One other guy I want to bring up, because to me, this is very interesting. All the reports out of the Senior Bowl in Mobile, Alabama, Joe Milton was awful. God awful. But let me tell you, everybody fawned over this guy's cannon of an arm. And you saw it on display on these deep balls. Like, he's literally just waiting back there. Like, come on, dude, get down the field. I'm ready to go. Like, these wide receivers just weren't fast enough. Do you think some coach or GM is going to tie themselves to this man because, oh my God, the arm talent, and get fired in 3 years? And if so, I need to know who it's going to be.
As a starter, no, he's not getting drafted as a starter. He'll be maybe 4th round would be the best case. And somebody's going to fall in love with the arm. He's like Jamarcus Russell went number 1 overall based on his arm strength, right? And he had basically the same prospect, right? Huge arm, but really can't do anything else. So somebody will draft him, but I can't imagine he goes into the league as a starter next year. No.
Oh, no, I wasn't even thinking that. I was thinking more in like the 3rd round, like instead of being like a tier 3 quarterback, maybe they leap into that 2nd tier range. But speaking of your tier 2 quarterbacks, guys like Bo Nix, Michael Penix, Spencer Rattler, did any of these guys stand out when you're sitting here and watching them on tape? Or on the field, excuse me.
Like you said, Penix had like top 10 all-time hand size, which is impressive. And he looked pretty good yesterday. He's got like, he can throw to the sideline deep as well as anyone. I think Penix is going to be basically Will Levis, right? He's kind of really the same quarterback. And I think he'll probably get around the same draft capital where he'll be kind of early day 2. And maybe someone trades up to get him early in the 2nd round. Does someone trade up into the 1st to get that 5th year option on him? I'm not sure if that's really going to play out.
Like we haven't seen that as much over the last few years as we did maybe like 5 to 7 years ago.
And especially with him being as old as he is, I mean, he's been in college since like the Carter administration, and him having the 2 knee surgeries. I don't know if anyone's really going to care about having the 5th year option on him, but I think he will go early 2nd round. He looked good yesterday. Spencer Rattler just did not look like he had an NFL arm. I don't see that. Nix is exactly what we thought he was coming in. Just if you want to run kind of an underneath offense where he isn't asked to air it out and threaten you deep, he can be fine. But I don't think he's a starting level NFL quarterback.
Feels like a Sean Payton type quarterback. I don't know.
From what we hear, Payton's enamored with McCarthy. So
yeah, right.
Maybe that's the team that trades up to get.
It seems like there's going to be a few teams that might be enamored with JJ McCarthy. So, but again, like Sean Payton wants somebody that you can just fit into his offense and say, run it, right? JJ McCarthy basically proved that at Michigan. Wasn't asked to do anything. It just went out and executed Harbaugh's offense, and obviously it worked out. They won a national title. So,
all right, let's be a much better fit in that offense than Russell Wilson.
Oh, 100%. All right, let's switch gears a little bit. Let's get into the running back position because everybody has talked about this class being pretty meh. Just putting it all out there. But there's definitely some highlights. All right, I want to start with your boy, Jonathan Brooks. So we at Women of Fantasy Football had Wendy Early and a few others in Indianapolis for the combine. And Wendy actually got to ask Jonathan Brooks a question. She posted it on Twitter, and I thought that was freaking awesome, by the way, for somebody that has never done an event like this, and she was having the time of her life. So Wendy, shout out, kudos, you did an awesome job. Obviously he didn't run towards ACL kind of later in the year. Give me some optimism here. Like where did you hear anything that you were happy about that said, you know what, I feel good maybe taking this guy as my RB1 because I know he's your guy in this class? Or maybe there's something that's concerning that just really didn't fit the bill here.
Yeah, you're just not going to get much information with something like that. And
especially
with ACL tears. Yeah, with ACL tears, you just don't have that information until you're, basically healed and ready to come back. So he thinks he's going to be ready for training camp. And like I said, of course he does. Everyone does. Like Jameson Williams said the same thing a couple of years ago. And we saw that turned out. But yeah, so he is my top running back prospect in this class. Really can do everything well, running, receiving, pass blocking, inside the tackles, outside, really versatile player. But the ACL is a big hamper. So, in a rookie draft, I think you're kind of looking at this year as like Javonte Williams being his best case scenario. So yeah, that's going to kind of put a damper on his dynasty value, but I think he's a very good player and someone I'm going to want to stash.
Okay. So speaking of names in this class, I think the biggest name is probably Blake Corum, coming from Michigan, national championship winning team. 5'8", 205. Some people might say maybe an underwhelming 40 time at 4.53, 1.58, 10 split. Give us your thoughts kind of on the measurable side of it, and then kind of what you saw in the drills and how that may translate.
Like you said, the 40 is concerning for someone that size. For someone whose game is not going to be power at all, his game is going to be speed. The 40 wasn't there. The split time was not there at all. That was pretty underwhelming. So I think this is going to hurt his draft stock some. And I'm someone who was never in love with him as a prospect. I just don't think he's the elite. Like a lot of people think he's number 2 to Jonathan Brooks. I've never had him that high. I just don't think his game translates that well. And I think the combine is really going to hurt his draft stock.
So the one thing that like when I'm looking at this just from like numbers perspective, right? I see a running back that runs a 4.53. I don't think that's that alarming personally. Feels like most of the running backs are like, I remember Le'Veon Bell was a lot slower, right? 4.6, I think he ended up running. He was elite in his time, right? Patient runner, got everything done, did the dirty work. I can understand when you correlate it to the fact that he's only 5'8", 205, you probably want to see in that like high 4.3 range at least, maybe low 4.4. But I don't you'll have a couple of like your track star type running backs, but I feel like the really, really good ones that are doing the dirty work every single week and like the ones that are getting us the bare minimum fantasy points, they're probably in the 4.5 range, right?
Yeah, most of them. But like you said, this at 5'8", that's like ideal size. You want to be 6 foot, 6'1", 5'11", in that range. You're pretty significantly under that threshold. And frankly, a lot of teams are not going to have him on the draft board, right? They're not interested in a 5'8" running back. So, and I don't think he did anything at the combine to help himself to raise his draft stock.
Okay. I remember seeing they did like a simulcast thing. It was him and I believe it was Marshawn Lloyd from USC, where they're doing like the handoff drill. And like, you just kind of see like the way that Lloyd took the route to do that handoff versus Blake Corum. Corum knew exactly where he was going with that football. And I'm like, okay, maybe this kid, like his elite talent is more vision versus like the steps that we want to see, I guess, right? Like the traits that, the 40s, the speed,
athleticism,
that kind of thing. Right. But like when I saw that, I'm like, yo, his short area quickness was a lot better than Marshawn Lloyd, in my opinion. And I'm like, okay, maybe there's something more to this that you just kind of need to watch on tape versus just looking at, numbers on a piece of paper kind of thing. Just my personal opinion. Again, I don't profess to be a scout of any nature, but
that's fair. I don't know that Marshawn Lloyd's a great comp because he didn't have a very good combine either.
No, so. I agree. We didn't even bring him up on the show sheet, really. I was like, you know what? I really don't even want to mention it because, I didn't think he really did anything to like raise the stock. I probably heard it.
Didn't stand out in any way whatsoever.
Yeah. But speaking of guys with good 40 times, let's talk about Jaylen Wright out of Tennessee because homeboy came out blazing, 4.38 40, second longest broad jump of all time at 11.2. What are we thinking here? Is he a top 2, top 3 running back in this class?
I think he is. He's a guy I've always liked. He never really got he never got a full workload at Tennessee. A lot of teams will kind of say that's probably a good thing.
Probably won't get a full workload in the NFL either. So what the hell does it matter?
He may not. I think I think a good comp for him is Aaron Jones, who has never gotten a full workload in the NFL. So, but yeah, I really liked him as a player, and he really he tested out of the gym, right? He tested as well as kind of we expected / hoped, and really I think established himself as, let's say, the best prospect who's not coming off an ACL injury in the draft.
Fair enough. Yeah, just watching Jaylen Wright on tape, he's a jitterbug. He's quick.
Yeah,
and you definitely like that even from a 1B RB perspective. Another guy that had a blazing fast 40, Trey Benson out of Florida State. He's on the bigger side, right? Like he's 216, 4.39 40, 1.52 10-yard split. But the broad jump, the vertical, very disappointing. Not a lot of burst from the center of gravity there. But where do you have Trey Benson in your rankings? And do you think that after this, he could end up making a case for being that first running back off the board?
I don't think he can make that case. The 40 was fine. But like you said, the explosion metrics were not great. So yeah, I think that's going to hurt him some. I liked him. I didn't love him. And I guess this kind of just confirms that he's probably not an elite prospect. So yeah, I think he's probably going to be in danger of slipping into day 3. I think he's probably more of a 4th round guy than a 3rd round guy.
Well, see, and that's the thing that I find interesting about this draft class, because you look at all the wide receiver performances, right? And we're going to talk about them here shortly. Blazing fast 40s, guys coming out of the break, smooth route running. The talent in this draft class is clearly at the wide receiver position.
Yep.
You saw the corners on, I believe it was Friday. They're quick. They're fluid. There's some elite prospects in the corner class, right? And because of the rules nowadays, teams are thirsty for quality cornerback play. Like they need people that can keep up with these fast wide receivers. So I think at the end of the day, you're probably going to see more corners get overdrafted as a result of that, right? They're doing the measuring currently for the offensive line class. There's some hogs in this offensive line class. Like there are some big boys. Joe Alt measured at 6'8.5". Dude
That's
is a
crazy
monster. Okay. The way that this offensive line class is shaping up, you could have 6, 7, maybe 8 of those guys going in the first round. You could have 6, 7, 8 wide receivers going in the first round. And just the sheer depth of those positions that teams need, you could end up pushing this running back class even further down the draft board, even if there actually are a couple good ones, because the quality at the position just isn't as deep as these other positions that teams truly need. So even with a guy like a Trey Benson, who a team may fall in love with, there doesn't become a need to draft him till the 3rd, 4th round, right? It's going to kill some of these guys' fantasy stock as a result, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think we're certainly going to have to adjust for that, and that it's really going to be like it always is. It's going to be really landing spot dependent. So Trey Benson could end up if he ends up in Green Bay and is sitting behind Aaron Jones, it's entirely likely that he at best becomes an injury fill-in. If someone signs Saquon Barkley and they end up behind them, as a lot of these guys may just be insurance policies for the first year or two. So it's going to be really interesting, the running back market this year in Dynasty, just because there's so many free agents. There's obviously, which creates a lot of teams that have need at the position, but a draft class that is really kind of not, I don't want to say underwhelming, but it's not elite, right? There's no high-end guy like the Bijan or
not it. That's the easiest way to describe it. Not it. But speaking of underwhelming, a few names really just not great combines. Dillon Johnson out of Washington, who had a big year for the Huskies. 4.68 40, 1.62 10-yard split, which was last among the position. A 31.5 vertical, second to last. Just not good all around. Bucky Irving was somebody that I know a lot of people talked about. It was very electric. His measurables showed literally the opposite. 4.55 40. All the other metrics, which I don't have in front of me right now, I remember them being towards the bottom.
Underwhelming.
Very underwhelming, especially given his size, because he's not a big back at all. And then Audric Estimé from Notre Dame, who naturally is a bigger guy, if I remember correctly. I think he's over 220, but a 4.7 140. That's like fullback territory, man. Like,
yeah, that's like significantly worse than like AJ Dillon. So that's a bad side. He did show he had some pretty good footwork in the footwork drills, but yeah, that 4.71 that's a bad 40 time. So yeah, again, didn't help themselves at all. And like Dillon Johnson's a guy I really liked in Washington. Just, a guy who just really got the job done. Whatever you needed from him, you got from him. But yeah, tested just terribly. So I can't imagine he gets any more than, like, he's 5th round at best. Really disappointing.
Yeah, it's Jordan Howard territory.
Sure.
I mean, Jordan Howard did okay. He had a couple 1,000-yard seasons. Just throwing that out there.
Made millions of dollars.
There you go. All right, let's switch gears to the wide receiver position. And there's a lot to talk about. So let's just start with, we went into this, we had the big three, right? It was Harrison, it was Neighbors, it was Odunze. I think you can make an argument that there were a couple of wide receivers that inched into this, we'll call it the top tier, so to speak, like the guys that could very realistically end up as top 20 picks. That's what I'll say. I think there's still some tier gaps between some of these guys, clearly, but it all comes down to team need, right? Like you saw the Lions traded up a future first-round pick to go get Jameson Williams because Williams has a skill set that fit what they needed to do and was very elite at what he did. And when I say these 5 guys, I'm talking about Harrison, Neighbors, Odunze, but I want to throw Brian Thomas and specifically Xavier Worthy into that conversation. Do you think that is a valid assumption?
I think Brian Thomas is clearly the number 4 receiver in this class. I don't think he's going to go top 10, but I think he's pretty easily a top 20-ish overall pick now. And like you said, with Worthy, I think he clearly put himself into the first round. And then A.D. Mitchell, the other Texas receiver, ran a crazy fast 40 for his size.
Yeah, but the difference is he sucks at everything else.
Okay. I don't think he's that bad, but I think that time at his size is going to put him into the first round.
Well, I mean, teams do pay for speed. I mean, we've seen it over and over and over again. Like, the Bengals took John Ross in the top 10 because he was fast, right? The Raiders pick the fastest guy every year. They find a way to take him in the first round. It's what they love is speed. So I remember when when Worthy ran his 40 and they showed Antonio Pierce like reacting like, oh my God. And I'm just like, oh crap, he's going 13 overall, isn't he? Oh man. But I want to bring up Odunze really quick because Odunze had, in my opinion, a really good showing at the combine, right? I mean, he's on the bigger side for wide receivers. I think he's 6'3", a little over 200. There was obviously the argument that could he be the wide receiver 2, maybe over Neighbors, if you think that Marvin Harrison is maybe slipping a little bit because of X, Y, and Z, because this is the time of year when people overthink everything. Do you think that Odunze made a case for a team to say, yeah, this is my wide receiver 2 in this class?
I think it just depends on what you want out of a receiver, right? If you want that big kind of boundary X receiver, then yeah, I think you would prefer him to Malik Neighbors, and he's good enough, he's talented enough, he's an elite enough athlete that you can make that case. If you're looking for a more versatile guy, then I think Neighbors is going to be your preference, but it's all going to be eye of the beholder. They're both talented enough and elite enough prospects to be in that discussion. Both could easily be top 5 picks. They're that good. And like I say, it's going to be what style do you want more than do you think one is a better prospect than the other?
So on the flip side to that, do you think that Brian Thomas made a case to be selected over Odunze?
No, I don't think he has the body of work in college to make that case. But I think there's a tier gap there between Odunze and Thomas. But I think Thomas, like before the combine, it was just a hodgepodge, right? It was a bunch of guys who could have gone next. Was Coleman, Thomas, Worthy, Mitchell, Lad McConkey, obviously. So I think he clearly separated himself from that group and is now and Thomas was probably going to be someone who's going to go like late 20s, something like that. I think he's firmly in play for, a team in late teens, early 20s who's looking for a receiver. I think he's clearly separated himself from that group.
This is definitely the year to have a lot of first round picks in your rookie draft.
Oh yeah. Especially if you need receivers. There's just so much elite talent in this class. It's crazy. I think this is a better class than 2014.
Woo! That's high praise. That was a good one.
It is.
All right, I'm going to bring this up because our good buddy Gator mentions him here in the chat. Troy Franklin, 4'4", 140. Not bad. Not great. I think a lot of people were, and again, going into the conversation with this draft class was after the top 3, it's flavor of the week or flavor of the month, right? It's who do you prefer for what fits best with your scheme, etc. And Troy Franklin, I think, was very much in that conversation. 4'4", 140 is great. Cool. Awesome. Given his size, everything else was pretty unremarkable. Drills, kind of maybe hit or miss. You put here in the show sheet that you think he's probably out of the first round. Do you think he's still a top 10 wide receiver in this class?
Yeah, he's still a top 10 receiver, but I think he was a guy who had a case to be made to go late first. I think he's pretty clearly out. Didn't test, like you said, the 4'4", 140 is fine, but when you've got 10 or 11 guys who ran sub 4.4s, it just doesn't stand out for a guy whose game is supposed to be speed. And he also he had a really bad, it was called the gauntlet drill, where you're just kind of running down like a yard line and just kind of turning, catching balls. He was kind of weaving all over the place, didn't control his body well in space. So I think that's going to reflect poorly on him for someone whose game in college was basically just running a straight line and down the sideline. So I don't think he did himself any favors. I think some guys like A.D. Mitchell and Worthy clearly passed him to where they were kind of in that same group before. So yeah, I think he's definitely out of the first round, and we'll see. I don't think he's off too far. I don't think he's going to day 3 or anything like that, but I think it clearly cost him first round draft capital.
Yeah, a couple other guys that you bring up here that I'd like to mention. Ja'Lynn Polk, obviously, pretty solid, 9.47 RAS score. Then, of course, the white Garrett Wilson, Lad McConkey. Because somebody needed to say it, let's be honest. I saw a graphic where they put up, his measurables with Garrett Wilson, and I'm just like, oh, so they're the same person? So Lad McConkey's going top 10 now? Book it. Because somebody's going to make that comparison, right? Real quick, obviously shining at the Senior Bowl. Everybody's been all over Lad McConkey this cycle. Give us your thoughts on McConkey really quick.
Yeah, we had Nate Pulvoet on a couple weeks ago talking about the Senior Bowl, and he compared him to Cooper Kupp. I've been kind of all along saying I thought he was more Adam Thielen, but the Garrett Wilson comp is really interesting because, like you said, he was like the measurables and the speed times are almost exactly the same, kind of eerie. So I don't think he's Garrett Wilson. I don't think he's that level prospect, but I think he's someone who's going to get drafted around kind of the turn of the first round.
I dig it. All right. So now we got to talk Xavier Worthy because the dude lit the combine on fire. And obviously all of the measurables are there. 5'11". Obviously the 165 isn't great, but the vertical, broad jump, 40 time, all absolutely elite numbers in college. But again, on the smaller side. Now, you'll have some people that will tell you that BMI, when it comes to wide receivers, isn't the end-all be-all the way that it might be for running backs. I believe his BMI is about 23, which is not great. Closest comp I think we have is probably like Devonta Smith, Tank Dell range, and both have come out and played pretty well in the NFL. So, to me, I think the most inevitable comp is Tank Dell, just based on size. And I think that if not for Texas next to Xavier Worthy's name, you're probably talking literally about Tank Dell at this point, right? So where, like, I know you weren't a big Tank Dell guy. So would you classify yourself as, all right, I'm paying attention to Worthy after what I just saw from Tank Dell in 2023 and what I just saw from Xavier Worthy here at the Combine? Or are we just completely off of the small wide receiver train?
Yeah, I have a lot of leagues where I've gone back and kind of looked at the drafts from last year and gone, oh my God, I took that guy in front of Tank Dell. Oh, okay, what was I thinking? So, yeah, I mean, yeah, I have had kind of a bias against smaller receivers. And like Segoli and I have talked about, that's one thing and we talked about on our New Year's show. That's one thing I'm kind of actively trying to push myself away from. I think you bring up a good point with the Texas thing is like if Tank Dell had gone to Texas, maybe he's the same level of prospect that Xavier Worthy is. I think Worthy's clearly a better athlete. Does that translate and make him a better football player? Not necessarily, but I think Tank Dell's a reasonable comp production wise. If he can get into an offense that's going to kind of showcase him and his abilities, I think you could see that kind of upside.
So we haven't talked too much about the tight end class, and obviously a lot of that is because the biggest draw of this class didn't do anything at the Combine. But there's one guy that I do want to bring up because he put together a 10 out of 10 RAS score because holy crap, he's really freaking athletic. And that would be tight end Theo Johnson out of Penn State, 6'6", 259. I think Jatavian Sanders has kind of been the consensus tight end 2. Do you think that Johnson is the tight end 3 in this class? Do you think he has a case for the tight end 2 based on this athletic profile, excuse me?
Tight end 2, no. I think that's going to be Sanders no matter what. But I think there's a case to be made that he's kind of a late bloomer in that he's from Canada. He wasn't recruited at all. Basically had to he went to Penn State on a tryout just to kind of get on the team. So I think he could be like, you see these numbers and it just immediately kind of harkens back to Jelani Woods, which is kind of terrifying. But kind of with this body type, like 6'6", 259, 260, basically. When these guys are like 20, 21 years old, they're just kind of hitting their physical maturity. So that's an odd size, right? It's not a normal human being size. And I think that's why you see so many.
What are you talking about? You don't think I'm 6'6" sitting right here? Come on, Joel. What's the matter with you?
I'm nowhere close to 6'6", 260. So I think there's like, you have to kind of, and we've seen this like with Jelani Woods specifically, and a guy like Luke Musgrave, right? They have where they have these like moments on the field where they're just stumbling and look completely uncoordinated. But I think a lot of that is just learning how to control their bodies in space. And it's really like they're just physically maturing. So they haven't lived with these bodies for a long time, right? So there's development that's part of the reason these guys take so long to develop is it's just a physical maturity as much as, we've got to learn block. We got to learn how to run routes and stuff like that. So there's a lot for these guys, especially at that size. So I think there's a case that he's like a late bloomer and could kind of become, if you're willing to wait for it, he might have that like Jimmy Graham upside.
Well, this is kind of what we do at the tight end position. Wait. Yep. Hold. Yeah, pretty much. All right. So in a nutshell, tight end position, it's Bowers, long wait, Sanders, long wait in the field. All right, let's go to a few other highlights. Let's talk about Michael Penix because the hand size, that's a big motherfucker.
I mean, also the 81-inch wingspan. I mean, that dude's a Condor, right? That's crazy. So
some pterodactyl arms right there, man.
Yeah, I think he tested better than people expected. So yeah, I didn't run a 40, obviously, but
he doesn't need
the
to.
measures. Yeah, it doesn't really matter for quarterbacks. I think the measurables kind of, I think, put him into that late first, early second territory, even with the issues he may have had at the Senior Bowl and in the national championship game.
Yeah, there's definitely, but I mean, I don't know. I feel like with quarterbacks, it's always like, you pressure them in right up the middle. That's where you get them, right? That was Tom Brady's biggest thing too.
Yep. Some
people just over time, they learn to mask it a little bit better. But just like when you watch the ball jump out of Penix's hands, it's just like, and it's so effortless when he does it. Like that to me is what's so impressive and so much fun to watch with Penix. And I think from there, it's just getting the mechanics, right? The footwork and the hips, get that down and get it more consistent. And I think just with good coaching, that can come to fruition. But I also understand the narrative. Well, he's an older prospect. He's 23, 24, I think. And it's like, if he hasn't learned it by now, what makes us think that he's going to learn it by his mid-20s?
Better coaching in the NFL than there is in college.
1,000%. Because, at the end of the day, your college teams, I feel like lately they're less focused on actually developing the talent and just figuring out how to win so that they can keep their jobs. And in the NFL,
a lot of these guys,
go ahead.
No, a lot of these guys can get by on sloppy mechanics because they're just so much better than the teams they're playing against, right? You're playing against Idaho or whoever. So you don't need to refine your game as much as you're going to have to in the pros.
Agreed. All right. Another standout here at the running back position, Isaac Guerendo, currently Louisville Cardinal, formerly Wisconsin Badger. Really good size, 6 feet, 221, 4.33 40. Some pretty elite testing numbers. So as a former Badger, Joel, I'm assuming that you have a bit of a scouting report here on Guerendo.
Yeah, I mean, he was Jaylen Wright was the second best running back who tested at the combine. Isaac Guerendo was number one. He's a guy who had some injury problems at Wisconsin and then left the team because they had Braylon Allen, who wasn't going anywhere, and Ches Malusi, who transferred in from Clemson, who really sad. The guy could have been a really good prospect, but he's like torn up both his knees and just had terrible injury luck. But yeah, that running back room was just too crowded for him. So he transferred out and went to Louisville, had a decent year there. But yeah, just blew up the combine, had a just crazy good week. So I think he's going to put himself on the map to be certainly drafted. I think he may be like a top 5, top 6-ish draft capital out of this class.
So better prospect than Braylon Allen, who was pretty underwhelming this week in Indy.
Yeah, he did not test well. But again, the thing with Braylon Allen is always going to be his age, right? He played his entire freshman season at 17. He's not going to be able to buy a beer until like the playoffs next year. So he's going to play his entire rookie season at 20. So I mean, that's the allure with him, is he's so young, he's this good at that age, and he was a linebacker in high school at Fond du Lac. So I didn't become a running back until like going into his senior season. So he's just really not refined as a prospect. So you're betting on the come with him. He's not a finished product. Hopefully not a finished product by any means. So, I mean, as you look at them right now, if you stack them up, I think Guerendo is a better prospect than Allen. But again, it's the age with Braylon Allen, is that he's so young and you're looking for better things to come from him.
It's that JJ McCarthy syndrome, right? Like you see the trades.
It's all projection. Yep.
It's all projection. Yep. Perfect. All right. And the last guy I want to talk about, Keon Coleman, because to me, I've always looked at him as a wide receiver that probably needed to play 10 years ago, because his game just is not the game of the present day NFL, right? He's a 50-50 ball guy. He doesn't separate really well. And you saw that with a very underwhelming 40 time, right? So, and quarterbacks these days too, like young quarterbacks, they need the wide receivers to get open. There's not a lot of timing, right? Like you're not just throwing it to a play saying, all right, I trust my guy is going to make that play regardless of whether a corner is draped all over. There are very few quarterbacks like that in the NFL right now. So a lot of these young receivers, if they can't separate, they're not going to have the quarterback's trust, and the quarterback's going to get sacked a lot. We're seeing a lot of sack numbers these days. But Keon Coleman, again, didn't really test really well, like just a bad combine as a whole. And there were some people that had him probably as high as their wide receiver 4 in this class. Where do you stand on Keon Coleman heading into rookie drafts and pro days and all that good stuff?
So I was one of those guys. I had Coleman right there with Brian Thomas, kind of tied as that wide receiver 4. I think there's some things that he can improve on when he goes to his pro day. I ran track in high school. I didn't run sprints, but I was a distance runner. But like when he ran that 40, I was like, oh my God, dude, you need a coach. He was just, from a form standpoint, he was really bad. Like his first one, he took like a false step to the right before he got down. I mean, that's just going to kill your time. I think with a little bit of, he gets with a track coach, he could legitimately take like a 10th off that time. So I'm not worried about his 40. The one thing that really stood out is we talked about Troy Franklin struggling in that gauntlet drill. Keon Coleman was the fastest guy through that drill. He was right down the line. He did it perfectly. I think he was timed at over 20 miles per hour on the GPS. So I think he's a guy whose football play speed is going to be a lot higher than his 40 time. So he's like, this may look like he had a really bad combine. I don't think it's going to affect his draft stock too much. And I think it's something he's going to go to he's going to be one of those guys who goes to his pro day and has a much better performance than he did at the combine, I think.
Yeah, because everything's scripted to favor the player. So makes sense. All right. Switching gears from the combine, as we do every week here on the Dynasty After Party, the Do Better Trades of the Week, because Joel is a degenerate and has way too many Dynasty leagues, and of course, makes trades for your entertainment, folks. Let's start here. It's a 12-team, start 10, Superflex, and tight end premium. If I was Sicoli, this is why I say I'm not as good as Sicoli. I would have this up on the screen for you and be more prepared for this. But we have Patrick Mahomes and the 112 in this year's rookie draft for Anthony Richardson and the 102. Joel, explain yourself. Which side of this are you on?
So I was offered Mahomes and I turned it down. And this gets back to I know. As we've talked about many times on the show, I do not like trading up from a very good quarterback to an elite tier quarterback. I don't want to give up extra capital to make that move because, like I said many times, any given Sunday, any given season, right? Anthony Richardson, assuming he can stay healthy, and that's, if he can't, I'm going to look pretty stupid for turning this down. But if he can stay healthy and develop into the quarterback that we saw for those 4 games this year, he's basically right there next to Patrick Mahomes in that second tier. And like going from the 112 to giving up the 102 and dropping down to the 112, that's a big jump. So I don't want to give up that kind of capital to make a move that I don't necessarily think I have to make.
So this would be my thought process here. Okay, I understand moving back 10 spots isn't the most ideal thing, but considering it's super flex and tight end premium, your top 3 quarterbacks and Brock Bowers are taking up 4 of the top 5 spots, right? And then you've got Harrison, Neighbors, Odunze, probably Brian Thomas in that mix. That's now 8 spots. So maybe you're getting a tier 2 wide receiver at that point, going from, say, if you need I don't know, if you're using the 102 on a quarterback, then yeah, I think obviously it's a huge dip because, you could be looking at potentially Jaden Daniels, or if you were staying quarterback at 112, maybe McCarthy or Bo Nix. But if you're thinking wide receiver, maybe you're going from Harrison to Worthy.
Yeah.
But you're getting a much more consistent quarterback, in my opinion. Right? Say what you want about the upside of Richardson. I'm talking consistency over 3 to 5 years.
Agreed.
I think that's worth it. Just saying.
I mean, in a vacuum, you're getting Mahomes for Richardson, who's probably worth 2 firsts, at least 2 firsts, but probably around 2 firsts, and then the 102. The 102 is a big piece, right? The 102 is probably, it's certainly a top 15 startup pick, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, if I'm looking at this as if this is a startup draft, you're talking the 102 probably for Mahomes for basically probably something around the 110, 111, and 115. That's not a trade I want to make. If I'm on the side with the 112 helps, but I don't think it helps that much.
Okay, fair enough. All right, I'm going to pull up Gators trade here since we're talking about Mahomes. So you're looking at, he was offered Mahomes, the 106 and the 111, for CJ Stroud, the 104 and the 110. So basically he would be moving back 2 spots in the middle of the first round and back 1 spot for a slight downgrade at quarterback. I don't know what the settings are. Maybe it's super flex. Maybe, knowing Gator, it's probably super flex.
Yeah, this is like, I guess I'm going to look at this and say, what's the point of this deal, right? Because I think Stroud is close enough in value to Mahomes that, again, I'm not going to give up anything of significance to go from one to the other. But there's just not a whole lot of difference between 104, 106, and 110. Obviously, 110, 111 is really no difference. I mean, you're kind of in a tier where it's flavor of the week, whichever you like. Does the 106 to 104 really matter that much to you? If it does, then I'm perfectly happy staying with Stroud. But I think this is pretty even straight up deal. So if you want Mahomes, cool, go for it. If you would prefer having the 104, I'm cool with that too.
All right, Gator does chime in. It's super flex, 6 points per passing touchdown. Does that change your opinion any?
I was assuming it was super flex, but yeah, the Mahomes and Stroud are similar. Neither one of them are relying on rushing touchdowns for their production, so the 6 point passing touchdown doesn't affect anything. So yeah, I think this is a pretty even deal. Yeah, so
yeah, I'm with you on that.
Whichever you prefer.
Yeah, I think that's really what it boils down to. I mean, I think over the next 3 to 5 years, your Mahomes is still probably going to be the better quarterback, or at least hold better value. And then from that point, it's just which do you value, which you could potentially get at 104, potentially get at 106. Because again, since this is super flex, your rookie draft is probably going to have 104 being Marvin Harrison, whereas your 106 could either be depends on,
Neighbors, Bowers,
whether it's Neighbors, Bowers, Odunze, right?
Yep.
So that's kind of where you look at that from. So
the interesting thing here with both these deals is that Patrick Mahomes is available, because in most years he's just not. You can't get him for anything. So Yeah, I think
this is what annoys me.
This
This is what annoys me because there was a couple of leagues that I was in last year where I'm like, all right, I need to make a big swing for a quarterback because I took over teams that just didn't have any. I traded away all my assets and I made a deal for Mahomes. Ultimately, like gave up like 3 first-round picks. Then of course he goes out and has the season that he has, and I'm just like, I could have got him cheaper this offseason. Like, son of a bitch. Where's my fucking crystal ball, right?
Right.
All right. And then the last section here is our come on, people, do better trade of the week, which I'm going to tell you right now, Joel, I have a better one than this, but
do you? Okay.
Second. Oh, God, yes. 12 teams, start 10, super flex, tight end premium. The 101 for Travis Etienne, the 110, and the 210. Hit me, baby.
What are we doing, people? I mean, come on. Are we that undervaluing the 101 or are we that overvaluing Travis Etienne? I mean, this is horrible. I mean, I was not involved in this trade. It just happened in one of my leagues. I just saw this and went, what? This is one of the where I go to the team that traded for Travis Etienne and say, okay, what can I pilfer from him? Because this is ugly. Yeah.
This is bad.
Got to do better than that. You got to extract more than that for the 101.
I agree. Especially with running back values at this point in the offseason aren't that high, or they shouldn't be that high anyway.
Exactly.
They're high in season, right? Or on the verge of the season. Not in March. So I was offered in one league. I took over this orphan, and this team is oof. Like, my biggest asset is CeeDee Lamb. Like, I have Deshaun Watson. I have Tua Tagovailoa. Like, I'm more than willing to part with either of those, but it is super flex. So I'm like, all right, I kind of need to be cautious here. This guy sends me an offer. Emmanuel Wilson, Jawan Jennings, and Dorian Thompson-Robinson for Deshaun Watson and Tua Tagovailoa.
Wow.
Like, what?
So 3 guys who should be on waivers for 2 starting quarterbacks. I know that's totally reasonable.
I could not hit decline fast enough. I was so tempted to like, DM them separately and just be like,
bro,
seriously? Do you need a CAT scan? Do you need a 72-hour psych ward hold? Like, what's going on here? But I just, I'm brand new to the league. I'm not trying to ruffle feathers, and I'm sure that they're probably just temperature checking to see the type of person that took over this league, right? Or took over this team. But that fucking floored me. I'm not even going to lie.
I can't imagine the thought process of anyone who would be in any way interested in any of the players you were offered. I mean, none of those guys should be on teams, right? Those are all waiver fodder. No.
Yeah, I mean, the league settings are a little deeper. I think it's over 30 roster spots. So it makes sense why those guys are, on rosters. But yeah, I knew that it was kind of like a slip because they literally went through the very next trade offer and took away Tua, but it was the same deal for Deshaun, and I'm just like, no, that's not even any better. Like, what are we doing here? So yeah, I was just like, oof, man. But I know I feel like for me to really compete in that league, I'm going to have to move CeeDee Lamb, and I don't want to do it. But I'm just trying to because it's an older team too, so I'm like, all right, I gotta try to find a way to
extract that value.
Yeah. And Gator, you are not wrong. They need to be watching Club Fantasy ASAP. So on that note, be sure if you are watching, hit that subscribe button over on YouTube. And you know what? Even throw us a follow on Twitch. We like to grow our audience over there too. That goes a long way towards helping us, and it's free for you guys. And if you don't really care for us, just don't hit the bell to get alerted on all our stuff. That's okay too. We love you all the same. That is Joel Wirth. You can find him on the app formerly known as Twitter at the Joel Wirth. You can follow me at the One Hudsonian. You can also follow our gone but not forgotten regular host, Michael Sicoli, Michael__Sicoli. But also follow Club Fantasy on all the socials: Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, Instagram. I think that's all of them. Club Fantasy FFL. You can follow the URL, clubfantasyffl.com. This is Dynasty After Party, and I know there's some saying about a disco ball and all that, but I was not all that prepared. So I'm just going to say, there you go. Keeps on spinning year round. See, told you guys, not as good as Sicoli. I'm sorry. But we'll end on that note. See you guys next Sunday.